Yes, friends, a very good evening. And as you can see, and as promised, Michael Kugelman is with us today. And we are going to talk about the situation in Balochistan and Bangladesh today. As you know, the sad news that is coming from Bangladesh today is that there is a place or there is a temple called Shyambari Durga Temple, which is in Maldapati, has been tossed by the Jamaat Islami activists today. It's been part of heritage of Bangladesh, but then now it's no more there. And but Michael will tell us more as to why we are being put in the religiously intolerant list in US, not Bangladesh. But anyway, so
Start with an easy question, right?
all right. So welcome back, Michael, to the channel again. And so tell me, what is happening in Balochistan right now after this train that hijack that took place, which was weird to when I was told. For some minutes, I could not understand what was going on as to how a train can be hijacked. But yes, that's how it was. And afterwards, a lot of things have happened in Balochistan and Pakistan. What's your take?
Yeah, well, that train attack has, I think, ushered in a very troubling new phase of the Pakistani state's approach to the Baluchistan challenge. I would argue it's really a crisis at this point. I don't think that you've ever had a case in Pakistan of an entire train being seized, and the train it was a civilian, it was a passenger train, so you had a
Yeah.
lot of kids and families, but you also had a large number of Pakistani troops. And this campaign of terrorism Pakistan's been experiencing for the last few years, much of it has been targeting security forces. So I think that the army, the military on the whole, is increasingly concerned and worried about this. It has not really had a solution to address these growing cases of militancy, and particularly concerning given that we're starting to see indications that different groups are starting to work together more, not just in terms of different Baluch separatist groups, but also Baluch separatist groups and the TTP have been cooperating on a number of attacks. So this presents a much more dangerous challenge to Pakistan, and particularly the security forces, which again have been the main target. So I think that the Jaffer Express attack was, I think, the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. And very soon after that, you had ISPR give this press conference where they said that the rules of the game have changed, and then they said that Pakistan is going to become a hard state.
Hard state.
Pakistan actually formed a committee called the Hard State Committee or Hard State
Oh,
Council, which
oh,
is yeah, which is so. I mean, it sounds sort of odd, but the implications are very significant and very serious. I mean, this suggests that Pakistan has decided to go guns blazing, so to speak,
yeah.
in terms of really ramping up this very muscular counterterrorism approach, and that entails cracking down even harder than it already is in Baluchistan. And what's happened in the days since the Jafar Express attack, significant levels of crackdowns, and obviously the example that's made all the headlines is the arrest of Marang Baloch, who has been arrested for some days now. It's unclear what exactly has happened to her, but the thing is, and it's so obvious, right? But sometimes the most obvious things are ignored the most. When you crack down in this way, you're only going to make the problem worse, the very problem that you're trying to solve. Pakistan wants
Yeah.
to pacify Baluchistan and so on, but I think that the militants are only going to be further aggrieved by these crackdowns, and certainly there've been a number of attacks that have happened in recent days. So it's a very troubling state of affairs, and I'll just end this comment by pointing attention to what I would view as describe as an irony. Pakistan is doing all this. It's going in. It's ramping up this very muscular, militarized approach to Baluchistan. At the same time it's doing that, it's ramping up efforts to attract foreign investors to Baluchistan to take advantage of untapped mineral reserves. There's going to be a critical minerals conference in Pakistan next week, which is going to be focused on essentially strengthening incentives to invest in Pakistan's critical minerals. The conference itself doesn't explicitly point to Baluchistan, but we know that a significant component of those untapped minerals are in Baluchistan. So here we have a situation where Baluchistan is really more restive than it's been in quite some time, and yet you have the government trying to make a pitch for people to come to Pakistan and indirectly to Baluchistan to invest. And obviously, if you have more foreign actors trying to come to Baluchistan to tap into mineral reserves, that's going to aggrieve the militants even more. So it's a very unsettling, but though very complicated state of affairs.
Michael, but in that scenario, as it is right now, how do you look at the current news which is coming for last 2 days? That is that the Chinese forces have actually come down and Balochistan right now.
Uh, I've not seen those reports. I'm not sure if those are confirmed. Are those confirmed? I think that
The writer and India Today both have reported that.
right. I mean, I mean, I think this has long been a concern that Pakistan has had, and I'd have to look at these reports before I comment definitively. But we know that China has been increasingly worried about security threats, and feels that Pakistan has not done what it needs to do to provide more security, even though Pakistan has provided thousands of troops to help protect Chinese assets in Pakistan, including in Baluchistan. And currently it is illegal for foreigners for there to be foreign security. Pardon me, it's illegal for there to be armed foreign security presences in Pakistan. I believe that it is okay to have a foreign security presence, but it can't be armed. How viable is a security presence if it's not armed? I think that Pakistan has long worried that China would essentially throw the gauntlet down and say, well, look, we need to be able to protect ourselves. We need to be armed to do that in order to continue with these investments. And I think Pakistan has been worried that China would put things in that way. Um, Given how important Chinese investments are for Pakistan, but it's by far the biggest investor, particularly when it comes to infrastructure. Pakistan really needs China to stay there. Um, and we know that CPEC has, I think, really been something that's animated or sort of galvanized the separatists, the militants in a big way. So long as China is committed to CPEC and to its investments in Baluchistan, Pakistan is going to face that heat to provide more security to China, but it hasn't done that. So yeah, I mean, if things are getting to the point where China is contemplating bringing in its own forces, I think, I mean, obviously, it would be an embarrassment to Pakistan. It would suggest that the Pakistani military doesn't have the capacity to provide protection to its most important ally, and it's one of its most important investors. That would be very concerning. But again, I'd have to take a closer look at these reports. It would not surprise me if things get to the point where China insists on bringing in its own forces, its own armed forces, to protect its assets.
This report is very much there. I also saw a vlog that Kamarchima has done this afternoon. He also talked about this, and he was blaming obviously his own country for that. That we have been a soft state. The soft hard state is kind of a phenomenon now. Said that we have not been able to deal with the Baloch problem as we should have. But I'm really worried, because if they are, you rightly pointed out, this collaboration between various fractions of BTTP, BLA, and other organizations that are kind of on the radical side of it. Um, the collaboration has been going on, and ever since the US exited from Afghanistan, and this whatever the leftovers were there, they also kind of were distributed among these people. I remember about 2 years back there were an advertisement in Afghanistan where they were asking for, it was a newspaper advertisement where they asked for suicide bombers for Pakistan. And that was 2 years back. It was formal newspaper advertisement. I remember the days of Musharraf after 2008. If you remember, between 2008 to 11, there was series of bomb blasts. Almost every day there was suicide bombings going on in Pakistan. I'm actually scared to think about the situation where they launch these kind of well some kind of operation in Balochistan, which I'm pretty sure will not be able to take on, because the terrain is such. I don't think they can cover the kind of area. It's almost half of Pakistan. So how how much forces can you apply there? And these people are up there in the hills. They can actually shoot you down anytime. And how many hills can you blast off like you did with Bukti, Akbar Bukti? So I mean, I'm actually looking at very bad scenario. And you talked of the embarrassment. Another embarrassment that has come today from Malaysia to Afghanistan. Imagine, from Malaysia of all the countries, that they have thrown out of the Pakistan from a hockey tournament which was happening there because they haven't paid their dues. So you see, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a mess, and it sort of reminds me of some time ago when PIA jet was impounded at an airport in where was it? Trying to remember
I
where,
think
because
I think Kuala Lumpur.
yeah,
To
I
Kuala
think so.
Lumpur.
Yeah, exactly, because it hadn't. It was because it was indebted and couldn't pay its own bills. Yeah, no, Pakistan, and these are linked. I mean, you're talking about the economic stress that Pakistan faces. It's a link to the security challenges because I don't think that Pakistan has the financial resources to mount a major counterterrorism offensive along the lines of what it did starting in 2014, the Zarbi Azab operation, which was, at the end of the day, still a narrowly focused operation in North Waziristan. It was focused on the TTP. And it was effective tactically in the sense that it did bring down terrorist attacks significantly for several years in Pakistan before the TTP regrouped from its bases in Afghanistan. But you're
Mhm.
right. I mean, it's very challenging. I mean, Baluchistan, you have multiple insurgencies that obviously have been able to operate very effectively and obviously know the terrain. We've seen over the years, over the decades, that these military campaigns don't have lasting successes, right? You look at what's happening today. The
Yeah.
fact that you had a 120% increase in attacks in Pakistan by Baluch separatist groups in 2024 compared to 2023, 119% is the exact number. That's extraordinary for all the wrong reasons. Um,
Mm.
and given how I think Baluchistan, it used to sort of be in the shadows even within Pakistan, but I would argue that given that there's this broader malaise in Pakistan, in the sense that you have significant levels of anger among many in Pakistan, many of them from Imran Khan's large support base, but also elsewhere, just very increasingly unhappy with the key state institutions, including the army, of course, but the government and others. What I'm seeing is more people outside of Baluchistan expressing anger and unhappiness about repression in Baluchistan. So this suggests to me, another important point to make, that there is not this Pakistan is so polarized right now, and there is just so much disaffection toward the state and its institutions, including the army, that I don't think that Pakistan would be able to muster the national consensus that would feel it would need for a large scale counterterrorism offensive, and particularly one in Baluchistan. You had this in 2014 for the Zarbi Azab
Yeah.
offensive. There had been, all kinds of horrific attacks playing out across the country, and they were, and unlike now, the attacks were targeting civilians in major cities. For all we talk about the upsurge in attacks in Pakistan, most of them have been in the West, in Baluchistan and KPK. They've mainly been targeting security forces. I mean, the train attack did target civilians as well. So there are differences between now and what happened in 2014. My point is that we're unlikely to see, despite all this rhetoric about hard state and all that, we're unlikely to see a major counterterrorism offensive. But even if there was one, and this comes back to another sort of obvious point, getting back to most obvious points tend to be ignored the most. You can't kill insurgency by killing insurgents. I mentioned this in a piece I published in Open the Magazine a few days ago. There has
Mhm.
to be more than that. There needs to be some type of dialogue and reconciliation. It's a very unpopular argument to make in Pakistan, particularly among the military brass, because they're really hurting. They're being targeted every day by these groups, but by the Baluch militants. But ultimately, that's the only pathway forward. The recruitment is growing for the BLA and others like it
Oh yeah.
because of these militarized approaches. Again, obvious, but sometimes these things are overlooked.
Yes, and when we talk about this, militancy, we cannot forget also the political approach that has been taken. And I seriously believe, and your comments would be welcome there, in that probably the dominant role of army has also somehow harmed the politicians and the civil society to take on this militancy, in the sense that they could not have this dialogue simply because they were under pressure from the other side. From it's a military which is taking the control, or policy making is something which is military dominated, not really the civilians. Because if you look at it, Akhtar Mengal, somebody like Akhtar Mengal he's been in the part of Imran Khan's cabinet. After when the PDM-1 came, he was part of it. From both, he resigned simply because none of them were, listening to the Baloch problems. He was never allowed to speak in the parliament. Once he spoke, that I put that, his statement in my shorts in the channel. But what I'm trying to mean is, what I'm trying to say about that is that how does the civil society, or how does a political leadership, um, you know drive this home, that they would take the responsibility and solve this problem, when the policy making is actually done by the army. But be it Afghanistan, be it Balochistan, or be it US, be it India, I mean, none of these policies are actually made by any civilian government. I mean, everybody knows that. You see, the foreign minister today is actually attending an economy finance ministry meeting. Imagine. I mean, is there any statement from the foreign minister over the last 3 months that this government has been in office? So, I mean, what I mean to say is, everybody says that the leadership is, kind of a coward. They don't take decisions. They are incompetent. But actually, whole mess has been created by the armed forces, because they are the ones who are policy innovating. Your take?
That's a fair point, and we know that throughout Pakistan's history, even at times when there's not formal military rule, the army has a dominant role over policy. But I would argue that, to your point, over the last few years, we've seen the army take an even greater role in policy. I mean, typically it's dominated anything involving defense, security, foreign policy, but its dominant role over economic issues has grown, as you suggest, and the fact that what's been described as a core investment mechanism, especially the SIFC, that the
Yes,
army
yes.
chief has a seat at the table there, so to speak. Absolutely, you're right. But I would say this. I mean, Pakistan's military has overseen, if not participated in talks with militants, terrorists that have targeted the military relentlessly. Whether you're talking about the TTP, that's the main one that stands out. I mean, there have been a number of talks between TTP representatives and Pakistani officials. Those talks have never succeeded, but they've happened. Obviously, the Afghan Taliban is a very different story. I mean, they were allied with Pakistan for many years and never targeted staged attacks on Pakistan. But the TTP is an instructive example in that regard. And the BLA, again, I view it as a terrorist organization. They do horrible things, but what I described in my piece in Openly Magazine the other day, the issue is that you have so many people in Baluchistan that may not support the violent tactics used by the BLA, but absolutely are behind the grievances that animate that group and others like it, right? Feeling that marginalized, resources exploited, so upset about the crackdowns, the disappearances, all of that. Understandably, they're upset about all of that. And so that's why I think that the army, which, as you rightly note, would drive any type of response or policy to the Baluchistan crisis, anything beyond a military approach as well, it would need to recognize that very simple fact that by continuing with the same policy, you're only going to help the violent actors in the end, because you're going to bring more. They're going to be seen as more legitimate by local communities there. They're going to get more recruitment, and at the very least, they're going to get more moral support. But maybe it's just too soon to be having this conversation. I think that the emotions are still very raw from the Jaffer Express attack. Maybe there'll be a willingness to think differently some weeks, some months down the road, but the attacks are not going to stop. Right? The BLA attacks are not going to stop. And, we've seen that this is a group that now has the capacity to carry out attacks beyond Baluchistan. It's claimed a few in Karachi. And if it's working with TTP, then, that presents even greater opportunities to do more damage. And I think what I really worry about the most is if we start to have a repeat of what happened between 2007 and 2014, when you have terrorists staging attacks across the country, including in major urban areas, including on civilians. I think at that point, the pressure would really grow on the state to do more. Obviously, that's a different story than the Baluchistan issue specifically, which I do think requires a political solution. But I think that the perception is very strong among the militants that the Pakistani state is not willing and able to address this problem, and that gives them more space. It makes them feel more confident, makes them feel more emboldened to do even more. So clearly, what's happening now, the response from Pakistan it's not working.
True, and but I won't counter you on that, Michael. But then I do believe that I hesitate to call it exactly, in purest form, a terrorist organization, the BLA, simply because also what options have they left for those people? If they are coming into a political mainstream and you don't hear their grievances and don't try to solve them, you're taking their, imagine the sui gas. They're taking the sui gas from Balochistan to Punjab, but the Balochistan itself is not getting the gas, which is in its own province. So talk about the 18th Amendment and all that, but then actually where does it lead? Nowhere. So the people are, it's like there is a electric wire that is going from top of your house, but you cannot get the electricity. you know
Yeah.
so I mean, I really, if the people don't have any option to express themselves politically and are not allowed to get into the parliament and get their grievances addressed, where else are they supposed to go other than pick up the gun? And don't forget, there is a history between Pakistan and Balochistan. I mean, that the area was occupied is non-question. It's unquestioned. So I mean, if you are occupying an area and kind of suppressing the same people, how long will they take it on? And then the definition of a terrorist organization or the terrorist and the freedom fighters is an open wide field. Then we don't head anywhere. But tell me, in this entire mess, financial mess, TTP, Afghan Taliban, Balochistan, KP, there is an area called Dera Ghazi Khan. Our friend Azaz was telling on the other day that, and it's because he said it on an open platform, that's why I'm quoting him. He said that in Dera Ghazi Khan, the government officials are unable to go to their offices. They stay back home, and in case they have to travel, they have to first inform the insurgents that from here to particular point they have to go, and once approved, only then they can travel. So that is the situation in KP. So basically, for all practical purposes, the two areas are, you have TTP governors in KP right now.
Yeah, it's very concerning. You're right, and I think this sort of brings to mind how things were in that earlier period that we talked about during the TTP's earlier heyday. And your point about KPK, I think, brings up another critical issue that explains why Pakistan is in such a pickle right now. You have a large base of TTP fighters and leaders in Afghanistan, and the Afghan Taliban are not helping Pakistan. They have no incentive to help Pakistan. They don't need Pakistan to
Yes,
help them anymore. This is,
absolutely.
this gets to sort of one of these, I think, fundamental errors in judgment of Pakistan, and particularly the Pakistani military, assuming that after the war ended in Afghanistan, that it would be able to continue to count on the Taliban helping it out. But overlooking the fact that it had lost its leverage over the Taliban because there was no longer a need for it to provide support to the Taliban, whether shelter, sponsorship, whatever the case may be. And the Taliban, maybe you and I have talked about this. The Afghan Taliban, even during the war years in Afghanistan, you'd get a sense every now and then that many of them didn't like the Pakistanis, didn't like having to be dependent on the Pakistani military, didn't trust
Mhm.
it. The fact that Mullah Baradar was in a Pakistani jail for so long. These things don't make the Taliban happy. So I think it's been easy for them to take a defiant stand against Pakistan on the TTP issue. But Pakistan, of course, has resorted to some periodic cross-border operations targeting TTP bases. This only makes their relations with the Taliban even worse. The Chinese, it's interesting. The Chinese are very impacted by TTP attacks as well. And one could argue that perhaps the Chinese would have more leverage over the Taliban than Pakistan does to try to press the Taliban to curb this TTP challenge, which the Taliban are not going to do. But I don't think this is what Beijing would want to do. Beijing is very
No.
concerned, but I'm not sure if it would want to be the one, sort of putting itself out there, pressuring the Taliban, which Beijing increasingly sees as an important interlocutor as it looks to ramp up investments in Afghanistan. I don't know if Beijing would want to do that. So that leaves Pakistan alone, unfortunately. It wants the U.S. to become a counterterrorism partner again. But I think for the U.S., it sympathizes with Pakistan over its TTP concern. But for the U.S., its major concern is Islamic State Khorasan. And the Trump administration would take, I think, a very narrowly focused approach to counterterrorism cooperation with Pakistan.
Yes, and I think just to add to that point, Chinese have actually now they are building this Wakhan corridor along with the Afghans. So I mean, they are pretty close for the corridor for trade between the two countries will open up anyway. I mean, they get close
Mm-hmm.
with that. So I mean, I don't see any logical rationale of Chinese putting Taliban under any pressure, and they are getting favors. They are getting the contracts for mining and all. So I mean,
Right.
it's a win-win. It's a win-win for Chinese. So, but in this situation, Michael, how do you see the relationships between U.S. and Pakistan from here on?
Yeah, I'm
This is kind of
actually
love-hate relation.
right. I'm actually working on a piece on this now. It could be a lot worse in the sense that Tariq Fatemi, a senior advisor to the government, has just been in DC the last few days, and he had a lot of significant meetings with key members of Congress. He met with the NSC, he met with State Department. And I think that he was fairly well received by an administration that certainly does not prioritize relations with Pakistan by any means. And I think that there's not going to be much to the relationship. Let's be honest about this. But I do think that there will be some areas where they work together, and one will be on counterterrorism. I mean, it's very significant that
ISKP.
the U.S. worked with Pakistan to apprehend that ISK terrorist. That's very significant. And the fact that President Trump actually thanked Pakistan during his joint address to Congress, he didn't thank any country. He was critical of pretty much every country he talked about, including India, except for Pakistan. Pakistan is the only country to be praised. Who would have expected that? But that's what happened. So I think that there'll be some scope for counterterrorism cooperation when it comes to ISK people in Pakistan that the U.S. wants it to help with. I think that there might be some opportunities for cooperation on trade. I mean, the trade volume is not very high, but Pakistan, it just ended import restrictions it had on American soybeans. Soybeans have actually been a critical, for Pakistan, one of the top imports, one of the top products it's imported from the U.S. for many years. It lowered those restrictions. That'll pick up. Pakistan certainly wants to attract American investment in its critical minerals, and I believe a senior State Department official will be attending this minerals forum next week in Pakistan. Pakistan is legalizing cryptocurrencies, interestingly, to try to make an appeal to the Trump administration. Yeah, they set up a crypto council, chaired by the finance minister. So, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a limited partnership. I think that the U.S. will be focused on other issues, and I think that both sides, especially the Pakistani side, which I think would have higher expectations than the U.S. side, we need to understand that it's a very transactional relationship because of the U.S. position, and try to sort of latch on to what few opportunities there might be. And one more opportunity I'll mention. CPEC is floundering. China's concerned about security issues. There might be an opening for Pakistan to make a pitch to the U.S. to through the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, which is a U.S. government entity that sponsors infrastructure investments. Maybe a pitch for the DFC to do a bit more in Pakistan. That's a pitch that Islamabad might make. But I think we have to be very honest that this is a relationship that will likely be fairly modest in scope, though not necessarily hostile. Even though the hovering, the sanction issue, the sanctions and ballistic missile program, which were there and at the end of the Biden administration, those concerns that the Biden administration had about Pakistan's long range missiles, those are definitely concerns with this administration as well. So there are those legacy issues that will remain there and will constrain deeper cooperation as well.
Michael, tell us more about it. What exactly are these concerns, the long-range missiles concerns? Because Pakistanis take, alibi of the fact that these missiles are only India-oriented and they don't have the kind of distance to reach US. So basically, Americans are just bullying us.
Yeah, and right. I mean, I don't know, but this gets into very sensitive issues that it's very difficult to know what's going on from the outside. But my understanding is that the U.S. was asking a lot of questions to the Pakistanis about what the intentions were for some of the new products it was planning to develop, and it felt that it wasn't getting good answers. It wasn't getting clear answers. I don't
Mhm.
know if the U.S. is genuinely concerned that Pakistan would have the capacity to be able to target the United States anytime soon. But I think that the missiles, and in the case that you had a senior Biden administration official talking publicly about U.S. concerns, I think that was meant to send a signal to Pakistan that they need to be more transparent. They need to be more forthcoming about what exactly their plans are with this ballistic missile program, which has not been, as I understand it, has not been impacted by the earlier rounds of sanctions. But I have no reason to think that Pakistan is being untruthful when it's saying that it is not looking to the U.S. as a target. It's much more focused on in an India context. But keeping in mind the issue of long range missiles, I mean, has you look at the Andaman Islands, right? That's fairly far. So I think that the Israel factor may come into to play here as well. There's
I
a
was
lot of
about to go there.
yeah, there's a lot of sort of tricky elements to this. All I would say is that I think the U.S. just wanted to send a signal. It wants more. It wants more clarity from the Pakistanis about what their plans are. It feels it hasn't gotten that clarity over a period of many years, and so decided to take this hard line, hoping that that would change things. I don't know. There are going to be some dialogues. There's going to be a counterterrorism dialogue between the U.S. and Pakistan, I believe, in June. That'll resume. That had happened in the earlier administration, but discussions on strategic stability, proliferation, those are extremely sensitive, and I don't really know if we could expect any of that to come in this administration, but we'll see.
Michael, there are two things happening right now. One is that you might have noticed that China and I actually, me and you briefly talked about it, over phone, when I told you that there's something going to happen between these two countries, that is China and India, that they are going to get close up, and they did after Kazan, and LAC things happened. So now that things are getting closer and actually improving between India and China, and I think in this week, within this week or next week, we will hear some clearances of huge Chinese investments in India in the infrastructure sector. So, in that background, how do you see, would that uh, would China lose any kind of interest in Pakistan with that? Would it put in the background, in the back burner? How do you look at the situation developing from here on? Because and there is also another development that is coming in. Putin is coming to India.
Right. Yeah, these are important points. I don't think we should overstate the improved ties between China and India. I mean, yes, I mean, if you look at how things had been going since 2020, hadn't been good. But so that means that what we've seen over the last few months has been significant with the patrolling deal, the border deal last year, and the meeting between Modi and Xi. And then decisions to resume air flights, and then of course Modi's comments in that podcast recently. But
Hmm.
I think that it's still a competitive
Yeah, a long way
relationship.
to
It's
go.
a yeah, a long way to go. And at the end of the day, they still diverge on many issues, and that's why I think that China will continue to view Pakistan as a critical partner. I mean, if nothing else, because it provides that foil to India. I mean, China feels it can use Pakistan to help counter India, So even with the issues in the China-Pakistan relationship, particularly Chinese security concerns, I don't think the developments on the China-India front are going to be a game changer when it comes to China's relationship with
Pakistan.
Pakistan. Yeah, I think that for me, the biggest and most visible consequence of this slowly improving China-India relationship will be on the economic side. I think there's going to be more diplomatic space and more political space for India to be able to loosen restrictions on Chinese FDI. So I think we could see higher Chinese FDI inflows growing. As you know, they've been very low since the Ladakh clash.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I expect to see the most. But you look at issues like Tibet, Taiwan, China's surveillance. There's so many things that they don't agree on, and I just feel that we shouldn't overstate, broadly speaking, the impacts of this small détente and what it could mean for China and Pakistan.
Yeah, right. I mean, one thing that I always believe that even if the ties are improving, one should not lower the guard. I mean, you have to be careful about your security aspect, and the borders, etc. is something that you have to be very careful about. So, irrespective of how improved the relations would be, I don't think that guard is going to go down. So
Mhm.
that's very much there. But I do see a positive side of it, that there can be there is a lot that the two countries can actually achieve in terms of
Yes.
yeah. So but how do you, and the role of Putin, that the Putin is coming to India, how do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, not unexpected, right? I mean, Modi had invited him to come in December, and there'd been a lot of messaging since then that they were looking into to dates. We kept hearing it would be the first part of 2025. We're almost into April now, but still, it seems that there is this genuine plan to continue this pattern of annual meetings. But I think the timing is notable, not from the context of India, um, Russia relations, but more so because of what's happening with the war. I mean, the Trump administration is really very active in trying to find ways to end the war in Ukraine. The Europeans are very involved, even with that bizarre blow up at the Oval Office with Zelensky and the Trump administration. At the end of the day, I don't think has hurt prospects for working toward peace in Ukraine. And because of who Modi is, and because of the Indian government, what it is. I mean, these are New Delhi, as I've written many times, and I'm sure you'll agree, it's one of the few governments that has a special relationship with Russia, but also good relations with Ukraine. Relations with Ukraine that I think have been growing. Modi's visit to Kyiv last year was a milestone, and there was a joint statement that said that it's time to elevate this relationship to a strategic partnership. So I really think that the Indian government hypothetically would be well placed to play some sort of role in any efforts to begin some type of negotiation toward a ceasefire or an end to the war. I mean, the Europeans and the Americans may be taking the lead on this, but Modi is going to be coming to India. There's a good chance that Modi will be going to Russia in May for a Victory Day commemoration celebration. That's not confirmed, but it could happen. And then the
Mhm.
two leaders will have an opportunity to meet again at the G20 summit later this year, at the BRICS summit later this year, SCO perhaps as well. And I think, quite frankly, that Modi should leverage these engagements with Putin to make another trip to Ukraine. Talk to Zelensky again. I really think that there could be an opportunity for him, at the very least, to try to move the needle forward by saying, "Well, look, let's work toward a ceasefire." I'm not a Russia expert. I can't get into Putin's head. I'm not completely convinced that he is actually ready to stop fighting and start talking. Same with Zelensky. But given that there is momentum for this from the West, from the Europeans and the Americans, I think that Modi, including during this visit by Putin, could leverage his unique position as a diplomat in this context to try to deliver that message to Putin. So that's how I see the visit. It's very routine in the context of India-Russia relations. You always have these meetings. It's a very smooth, consistently stable partnership. But I think that the timing could be very interesting. Or is very
Yeah.
interesting.
Very, very true. Very true. I agree. On paper, it does appear that India should play a role, but I mean, I don't see Europeans are coming to the table at all. I mean, I don't see any role for Europeans because I mean, the way NATO has behaved and whatever they have been doing, I don't think there is any chance that Russia would like to see them anywhere close to the table. That's I don't believe that. I mean, if I know anything about Russia and Russian mindset and whatever NATO has been doing over the last, Minsk agreement and Merkel's interview, so or even Ukraine's own role, the negotiations that were taking place in 14 in Turkey, for example, at that time. So it's I don't know. I mean, so I don't know who can actually convince Ukraine. And now that Russia has been provoked, Ukraine is where it is, and as far as the war is concerned, Michael, between me and you personally, my personal point of view is I don't think it's going to stop anywhere soon. It's not going to stop at all.
I
Right
agree
now,
with you.
it months away. I mean, if not a year. No. Anyway, so and go. Let's talk about a bit about Bangladesh. How are things developing there? I mean, as I told you, the sometime back there was this interview of army chief. Who spoke about who made some comments on the politicians and how political class should actually behave and get together. But how do you see how things are going? And by the way, the update is that 2.1 billion investment has been promised by China today.
Hmm. Yeah, and of course, right. Dr. Yunus is on a 4-day trip to China. So, as you know, I was in Bangladesh end of January, early
I remember.
February.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was my first visit since the events of last August, and I was struck by the fact that and to be very candid, and I know that many of your viewers may not like this assessment, that in terms of most of the conversations I had, I mean, people were pretty clear that they were much happier in the post-Hasina era in terms of,
Mhm.
feeling more freedoms, less repression, all of that. But one of
Mhm.
my biggest takeaways, and I think this relates to your current question, is that there seemed to be a growing level of impatience with the interim government. Because the economy was sputtering and is sputtering now. The law and order situation was very concerning, not just because of increase in violent crime, which the government itself has acknowledged with stats that it's put out in recent weeks, but also this is compounded by the fact that you still don't have the police at full force. So many of them have still not come back to work since the events of last August. So this is
Mhm.
this is certainly very concerning. I think that there's the public is increasingly impatient about what the interim government's intentions are, particularly on the reforms front. Not a lot of transparency about what the timeline is, what the actual plan is with these reforms, and also a lot of impatience about the lack of clarity about elections. And this I think is becoming a central issue right now. So, I think that Dr. Yunus, I believe, said recently that elections will happen, sometime between December and the first part of next year. That's a
June.
pretty wide
Yeah.
range. If the elections are not announced, if they don't happen by the end of this year, I think that could raise the risk of fresh political instability. That would be a really long time that you'd have an unelected government in place. Certainly a government that much of the country has been behind. But, if you continue to have this stress with the economy and the law and order and so on, and no indication of elections coming, with this focus on reforms without much transparency about what actually is going to come of those reforms, could be very concerning. Now, you mentioned the military chief. I know there's been a number of speculation, commentaries, almost exclusively from India, I should say, about growing turmoil within the military and military and the government. I have no reason to think that's the case, but I do think that there is a significant difference in view on the election issue between the military, the military chief, the army chief, and the interim government. My sense, and I heard this is definitely what I was told when I was in Bangladesh, the military wants elections to happen on the sooner side, much like the business community and a number of other key entities. But the interim government, mainly because of the influence that the student leaders have in this government, are the holdouts. They want there to be more time for the reforms to be completed. And also, I mean, the students definitely want more time in order to grow out their new political party to make it electorally viable. So there is that disconnect there. I'm not saying that that's causing significant levels of tensions, but there is that disconnect. And if we get to the end of the year and it's clear that elections aren't happening, then I think that those that disconnect or that difference between the military and the interim government that could come to the fore more so. But certainly a very unsettling moment. Clearly the new political realities in Bangladesh now have very clearly given more space to Islamist actors. I mean, that's very clear. And the government has appeared unwilling or unable to address that concern. I mean, you had Hafezat, you had Hizb ut-Tahrir, you had these groups during the Hasina era, and quite frankly, Hasina appeased some of those actors, particularly Hafezat. But what appears to be the case now is that the government is simply backing away, not doing much at all. There was a large Hafezat rally, I think, some weeks ago, and the police were actually there and they broke it up, which was a bit of a surprise because that hadn't been the pattern. But I think for me, sitting in Washington, this is definitely one of the big concerns, that you could have some of these actors that are that have views that are not democratic, that sometimes are given to violence. And you mentioned the Jamaat factor. I'm thinking about groups separate from Jamaat, the Hizb ut-Tahrir types, coupled with the fact that a number of high-profile terrorists were released from jail very suddenly with no explanation from the government. This is the type of thing that worries me. I certainly know this worries the Indian government and many in India for good reason.
Yes.
But that's
Yeah.
definitely what worries me the most.
Actually, I had a communique, other minutes of a meeting that took place 2 days back of not really the gentleman Mahfouz, who's advisor to the minority affairs, and he was actually in a meeting where he said that he is not going to contest the elections, and he's planning to actually move out. So and I'm told that there are many actually who are looking at the situation in Bangladesh and have their visas stamped already. In case there is something going wrong, they just quit, they'll just move away or leave the country. That situation is there, and I have that communication with me on my WhatsApp, which was sent to me. So what I'm saying is that it probably there's not much which is meeting the eye, because the internet is closed, the communication is pretty much bad right now, and there is this girl I'm aware about, a Hindu girl who has been protesting there, and she is pretty active right now. So it's very funny. I just don't know which way are they headed, and the economy is in doldrums. They're looking for investments from China. I don't know how will they want the production to go up in Bangladesh, but how will that happen without power? There's a lack of power right now. So and I don't think that, although there is support from India going, there's a huge sum that we have actually spared for Bangladesh in our budget this year. And recently, our foreign minister underlined that that money is meant for Bangladesh and will go to Bangladesh. So that support is not being withdrawn from the government. But the meeting between Yunus was requested, and apparently it seems it's not working. Between Modi and Yunus, they were supposed to meet in BIMSTEC next week, and I don't think the government has approved it. I mean, they have not responded. Dhaka is still waiting. So apparently, and then after he left for China, Yunus, the press secretary in Bangladesh said, the Yunus press secretary has said that actually Yunus wanted to go to India first before going to China, but because we did not hear from India, he had to go. My problem is, somewhere else. My problem is Modi generally does not meet unelected leaders. He considered Imran Khan an unelected leader. He never met him, never responded to him, never picked his phone call. And that's something Yunus needs to understand, or somebody needs to understand. He won't.
Well, I could respond to that in different ways. That's an interesting point. But if you think about the non-democracies around the world with which India is close, I assume the prime minister has no problem meeting with them, like the Saudi leadership.
Well, maybe a meeting Taliban as well.
I see your point. Yeah, not Modi. I mean, he hasn't met with the Taliban. But no, I see your point. Absolutely. No, look, I think it's very clear that it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, the Indian government will not want to go that far. Would prefer to hold back with the government in Bangladesh until there actually is an election. I think that there's a
Yes,
significant level of anxiety about those leaders in charge now. But I think if there is an election in Bangladesh anytime soon, there's a strong likelihood that it'll be the BNP that'll be leading the next government.
we don't mind that.
Um, yeah, I think that would be, to me, my sense is that India could accept that, particularly
Yeah,
because, at least formally, BNP has ended its alliance with Jamaat. That doesn't
yes,
seem to be there anymore. So, yeah, I see your point, but I have been struck that there has been a fair level of high-level engagement between the two sides in recent
that's
months,
happening.
right?
Hmm.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
it's happened, and
look,
the
it's yeah, as a democracy, we keep on talking, but then if you even if we supplied, I mean, we supplied grains to them some time back. So if they are in problem, because the people to people relation is not something that we are playing on, but our
right.
problem is that the government is not something that we are. And secondly, don't forget, we have Sheikh Hasina in New Delhi. So
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
yeah, so I mean, if we sit down with Yunus, what do we say? Tell her,
Hmm.
you know,
Though, yeah,
and she has
for
been a
sure.
long time alive.
Absolutely. And as I think you and I have discussed before, she's not going anywhere anytime soon,
No, no,
unless the third
not at all.
country finds her. But getting
Yeah,
back to the Eunice visit in China, yeah, I think it's natural that we would want to look at that trip through a geopolitical lens. But my sense is that Yunus's main focus of that trip was on economic issues. I mean, as you say, Bangladesh's economy is in trouble, and he's looking for relief. Believe he got a pledge from China to bring some of its factory production to Bangladesh, which is great for Bangladesh's manufacturing sector. I think Yunus has also wanted to negotiate an understanding to bring down interest rates for Chinese loans, and he also wants to get Chinese commitment to extend loan repayment periods for China. So, I think this is just a case of him wanting to get some help from what has long been a close economic and partner on the whole, right? I mean, Bangladesh-China relations grew significantly in the Hasina era, right?
yeah.
Bangladesh is a top recipient of Chinese arms, one of the biggest recipients of Chinese arms. It's been that way for a long time. I think it's maybe number two after Pakistan. And
Hmm,
that didn't just start after Hasina left. It's been going on for years. So
hmm.
yeah, I think that Yunus didn't go to China in this trip with India on his mind. I mean, maybe it was in the back of his mind, but I think that it was really meant to focus on the economic side. I think that he also wanted to, discuss a number of things with China, the Rohingya issue, and other issues too. But I don't think that India factored into this trip
Same
in a
here.
big way.
Yeah, I also think. I think it was just blabbering. He just said for the heck of it, but I don't think it was meant in that sense. So where do you think is if nothing? You mean to say if nothing happens, the election does not take place by December, which is out of question because Yunus has said it's between December to June next year. That's 7 months after December almost. So I'm not very sure if the elections are going to take place, but then till that time, because there were meetings happening last week and I think they're also because of the law and order situation, because Bangladesh is having pretty bad law and order situation right now. You rightly mentioned about the policemen. So I don't know, where do you think it's headed, the whole region, the Bangladesh, Pakistan. I hear now there are things not well in Nepal even. There's also some disturbance growing in Nepal. So I think at times it I feel, I don't know whether I should say I feel at peace or proud of it, that I'm probably sitting in a region which is much quieter. There is not much disturbance happening here.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, I think it is a bit of an unsettled moment for the region. And I would add to the list of things you mentioned, the war in Myanmar has escalated to a point where there's significant security
At home,
implications for
yes,
India, but
yeah,
especially for Bangladesh. I mean, the fact that the
all the
Arakan
time,
army
yes,
controls the entire border
yeah.
with Bangladesh, that's really significant, and that's something that China is not going to be ignoring either. I mean, that's given the location of all that,
One of
and the
your one of
Russians.
your army commanders was in Bangladesh 2 days back.
Yep, absolutely, indeed, for sure. So yeah, I think in terms of moving forward, what to expect on the Bangladesh front. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speculate too much because, December is a long time from now. But if we imagine that the elections don't happen by then, and I agree with you, if he's giving a range of December through June, it's going to be on the further end of the range, not the sooner end of the range. Um, what civil military relations might look like beyond that, becomes, I think, a notable question. Let's be very clear. Bangladesh's army is a much different army than it was before 2009.
Mhm.
It's changed a lot. It's been very comfortable remaining in the barracks. And,
Yeah,
if you look at what happened, there'd been some disinformation. I mean, Bangladesh's army was, really with Hasina until the end, until the day she stepped down, when the army chief basically said that she wasn't safe staying in Bangladesh anymore. Doesn't want to be involved in politics. It's been notably absent on the street, which one could argue is adding to the law and order challenges.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't think this is an army that would be angling to take on more of a political role, much less threaten a coup or anything like that. I don't see that happening. But
Same here.
if yeah, but if we get to that point where the army really wants to see elections, and why does it want to see elections? In my view, it's because it feels that if you have elections, that would bring a modicum of political stability, so
Yes.
long as the elections are free and fair. That's another big, a
Yeah.
big question. Would security forces be able to provide security? Another question which we didn't discuss: will the Awami League be able to participate in elections? My view is it will not be. I can understand why the interim government would not want it to, but I think that would be the wrong decision for a number of reasons.
Mhm.
My sense is that there would be a view that if the Awami League is able to campaign, there'd be significant security threats. There could be a lot of political violence, and the security forces might not be able to keep a rein on that, and that would be the optics would be bad. There could be significant levels of violence, and so on. But so that's something to think about as we get closer to the election, whenever it happens. Will the Awami League be allowed to participate? If not, what could be the implications of that? Not just in terms of how the election is perceived, but also in terms of security implications. So, no matter how you slice it, I think Bangladesh is going to be going through a fairly unsettled, hopefully not violent, period later on in the coming months, but certainly an unsettled period. And it definitely bears watching.
I was also I heard some maybe rumors that they were also thinking in Bangladesh about -1 formula. This cream cups this keeps sounds more like Pakistan, but the -1 formula was also being talked about, that maybe Sheikh Hasina could be sidelined and Awami League could then be allowed, a refined Awami League could contest the elections.
Yeah, right. That's an interesting suggestion. I mean, my sense is that those in charge in Bangladesh would not want any Awami League involvement in the elections unless the Awami League, led by Hasina, would actually apologize for what it's done in the past, acknowledge that it's done, for its excesses, that type of thing. And I don't think that the party is going to do that. That's not her way. That's not Sheikh Hasina's way either. But
Yeah.
you're right. Anything is possible. I mean, Hasina, I don't want to say she's a non-factor, but so long as she's in India, what's she going to do, right? And my sense is that much of the Awami League leadership is out of the country. Some of them have been arrested. I don't imagine many of them are there. So, there's really not much they could do unless the environment changes, and I don't think the environment is going to change until they're willing to atone for their excesses, their violence, and all of that. And I don't see that happening. And the level of anger is just incredible toward the Awami League. I mean, you know what happened when it became known that she was going to give a speech on social media. Before the speech came, even when it became known, you had these mobs that went and attacked her father's home and all of that. I think that reflects the anger among certain constituencies in Bangladesh. So it's just a very dangerous, delicate, but also a dangerous situation.
But I think, Michael, there are also other segments, not only the segments that attacked her father's house, Sheikh Mujib's house, but also the other segments. For example, there were also people who were there to protest, not to be attacked. They didn't want the attack to take place,
Yes.
and
Hmm.
those people were harassed. There were
Hmm.
videos came from the side. So what I'm trying to say is, for example, right now, look at the student leadership, which is actually cursing army every day, and they are saying that army is planning a soft coup. And recently, I think 3 days back, army actually snubbed them,
Hmm.
that these accusations are laughable. And who are these people? These are people who are actually running the government right now. So
Hmm.
basically, the student lobby has taken over the government. So how long will that be, taken just
Yeah.
like that?
Right. No, no, this gets to the issue of why there's such like so many volatilities within the political environment. And you're right. I mean, there's likely not monolithic views within the students in the government. I mean, you mentioned Mahfouz's decision. Nahid Islam, another top student leader, is
Hmm.
leading leading the party, the new students' party. Um, yeah, I mean, this is. I lost my train of thought, but this is certainly something to. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I think I mentioned this earlier in passing that the students are extremely influential in this government. Eunice
Yeah,
defers to them.
yeah,
I mean, they invited him to head up the interim government. I think he feels, that he owes them a debt, so to speak. But he is not going to stand in the way, in my view, if of the students that think it's the right thing to do to hold off elections more until there's more progress made with reforms and all. He's not going to stand in the way of that. The army chief might want to, but at least to this point, I don't think is going to do that. But yeah, I mean, these guys, it's remarkable. I mean, it's extraordinary, right? And these are kids that are what, 25, 26 years old, to have that level of power, that level of political power in a region where youth politics oftentimes are crushed. We see this
yeah.
in a Pakistan context with the banning of student unions for decades. It's a
Hmm.
remarkable success story for youth politics, but I think pragmatically it sort of raises a lot of questions.
Yeah,
Is it a good thing for such young and inexperienced leaders to have this outsized influence over a
yeah.
country at such a volatile moment in its political history?
Absolutely, absolutely, Michael. And it's actually for that country, it's pretty scary scene. And I mean, in my opinion, it's a scary scene for these young kids to have that kind of power and dominate. And I don't know which way Muhammad Yunus is gonna go up if he is not standing in the way. If he's not the one who's providing the leading light, then I don't know. Is how the future should look like for Bangladesh. But thank you so much for your time, Michael, for this day and for this wonderful conversation. I perfectly enjoyed it, as
Me
always.
too.
And yeah, so and we should catch up soon for another one. I'm sure something else will be coming up very soon in Pakistan and Bangladesh. This is a volatile situation, so so we
Very
should
much
we should
so.
catch, yeah, we should catch up soon. Oh, before you leave, I forgot to ask you something. You didn't speak much about Marang Baloch. What do you think of
Well,
her
I
political
mean,
campaign as such?
yeah, I mean, I think that I see her as an admirable individual, and that she's a young woman who has emerged as the leader of this growing peaceful movement against state repression in Baluchistan. I think that's very admirable. Um, I know she's controversial among many in Bangladesh because of, pardon me, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, because of her family, what's been described as her family's links to militants. I mean, I can't speak to that. Um, and she is someone, critics point out that she rarely condemns BLA attacks, which is something that stands out from the critics. But you know, I think it was the absolute wrong thing to do to arrest her. And I had tweeted about this. I mean,
I did see that.
I mean, she is at the heart of this peaceful movement that, yes, might be aggrieved by the same issues that fuel the militancy. But she's seen, I mean, she's held in great reverence by so many, not only in Baluchistan, but elsewhere in Pakistan. And so the longer that she stays in jail with no clarity on what's happening with her, I think the more dangerous an issue that becomes for Pakistan on the whole. And I think that she is, as I said, an admirable individual and activist, and she's starting to get global recognition as well. I mean, I believe she was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize just a few
Yes.
days before she was arrested. Um, Many in Pakistan would say, "Well, that's a good reason not to like her, because to think the Nobel Prize recognizes people that don't deserve it, sellouts to the West, blah blah blah." But no, I think that she's a complicated character, a complicated individual. As I say, I admire her for her advocacy and her activism, but I do acknowledge the criticism that some have of her. I just hope that she's released as soon as possible.
Michael, actually, I'm just sharing my point of view with you. I honestly don't find that criticism valid.
Hmm.
when they say that she does not criticize BLA. First of all, if you look at the events that have been happening over the history, and if you put them in chronological order, you'll have to see what came first. Did the BLA came first, or did the state oppression came first? And how it all, you put it in the sequence, and then you see what comes out. Secondly, the stage at which she came into the political fore, the Marang Baloch, imagine, can she actually play a political role, play a moderate role, and criticize the BLA, which is all her own people, and then knowing that every day the military is picking up people
Hmm.
every day. So how will she justify? So it's basically a double-edged sword that she has to walk on, and basically balance herself somewhere in the middle, which is not an easy thing to do politically.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I have no reason to think that she supports violence in pursuit of goals. I don't think she supports the tactics of BLA. But yeah, I mean, there's a very complicated political undercurrent to this, and I think you've laid that out. You've laid that out very nicely. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak to the criticism. I can understand, especially at a time like this, why many people in Pakistan would be unhappy that she's not willing to publicly criticize an attack that targeted hundreds of people, including many civilians and children. But yeah, I see where you're coming from on this, and I acknowledge that.
Another argument, for example, her father was an activist. We all know that he was a human rights activist. Majority of our friends who comment on the issues, including our friend Kamar Chima, they more often than not, I've heard him saying she's the daughter of a terrorist.
Mm,
Now, when you come down to that sort of language, where do you take the political debate?
hmm
How do you negotiate with her in that case? And look at what they did when she came, when she was sitting for more than a month in Islamabad. It was perfect time for you to have a political negotiation. Our friend Murtaza Solangi, for example, was there as a minister. What did they
hmm
do? What did they talk?
Exactly.
What was the
Yeah.
promise? And shamelessly, I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but shamelessly they were telling her, no, tell us what we can do. Don't tell us what we cannot do.
Mm,
Means what? Right now, the way the journalists are being picked up every day. Ahmad Noorani is sitting there in Pakistan, in the US right now, fact focus editor. Look at what his brothers are missing for a week now. And the judges are not listening his case.
yeah, absolutely.
Just
No, this is the hard state that we were discussing before. It's playing out in very troubling ways in Pakistan. You're right. At a moment when there's never been a more important time for dialogue and reconciliation,
yeah.
um, we're seeing the very opposite. You probably saw this, or is it an op-ed in Dawn by a former Pakistani ambassador, Ashraf Jahangir Kazi,
Hmm.
writing about how Pakistan needs a Mandela-like reconciliation. And it seems sort of quaint and abstract and unrealistic, but at the end of the day, it's true. It's a dangerously divided country at the moment. Pakistan is.
Michael, this has been
Yeah.
talked about for years. I hear this
Yes.
about this Truth and Reconciliation Commission for I don't know how many X years, but they just don't do it. Who will do it? Because everybody knows, Michael. It's our friend Gul Bukhari. I don't know whether you know her. She's in UK. She used to be a journalist, but she's now based in London. And she was telling me that our people in Pakistan are trying to uh, you know mm, clear a well where a dead dog is there. So in a well there is a dead dog, and so they are taking out the water, hoping that the well will get cleared. Whereas the dead dog is already there, so they're not taking out the dead dog, which is military. So it is the dead dog which is contaminating the water, and it's not being taken out, but the water is being taken out. So how will you clean the water? This is my problem. That in look at the history, entire history, and even do you remember the Anjum when he was ISI head, and he had the press conference when Imran Khan was protesting, and what did he say? He said, "We are out of politics. We are not getting into the politics. Leave us alone. We have learned our lesson in 71." do you think the role of army since then has increased or decreased? That's the
Yeah,
question.
as we've said, you and I discussed, it's increased significantly. I think there's never been a time when Pakistan was not under direct military rule, when the military had such a dominant role in policy. We had discussed this before. I mean, they all say that, right? I mean, outgoing army chiefs, Bajwa said this. I'm sure others have said it too, that it's time for the army to get out of politics, but it doesn't happen. And that's a whole other conversation why that's the case.
I've
But
never been able to understand. I've never been able to understand. I mean, actually, I remember when I was in Lahore and I was giving this in Nizam City's bookshop, I was giving a lecture. That was way back in 2016. And, I marvel these people. Their sense of humor is absolutely crazy. The Punjabis. So I was telling them how Pakistan is going to get into the danger, ecological danger of the droughts are going to come to Pakistan, and the water shortage is something that you're not looking at.
Mhm,
Now look at it. Now they are looking for climate support from UN, from US, from everybody else.
mhm.
But at that time, when I was talking about it, believe me, they were laughing at me.
Yeah. Uh, sure.
And before we end this conversation, I think won't we, probably you would also speak about it. Mm, there are many who talk about, kind of India-Pakistan relations and stuff. I really feel, even if we are enemies, in India, you go to any university, you can study about Pakistan. You,
Mhm.
you go into the international relations, and you will, and I promise you, you go into any university in Pakistan, look at the IR curriculum, and tell me where India is mentioned.
Well, it's the infamous Pakistan studies idea, right? That it's a very selective look at history and policy, and indeed, India is projected a certain way. Um, yeah, again, that's a whole other conversation.
Mm.
But yeah, it's unfortunate the way things have panned out. But hey, that truce, the LOC truce, it's been more than 4 years. It's still holding, right?
Yeah.
For now.
All right,
Yeah.
Michael. Thank you so much for this day.
That was great to speak with you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, you brother.
All right.
Okay. Oh my